Welcome to episode 263 of Silver Lining for Learning. We're talking about
Congratulations.
how
Wow.
AI is used in schools and from a report co-authored by Rebecca Winthrop from Brookings Institutions. And we have all our co-hosts here, Punya Mishra from Arizona State University, Lydia Tao from University of Toronto, Chris Deedy from Harvard, Kurt Bang from Indiana University, and I'm Yong Zhao from University of Kansas. So Rebecca, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And we've all seen this report, and I believe Punya was even on the board. So we will treat both of you as guests. So why don't you get started telling us about what are your findings and how did you reach those findings of this report? And also tell us about yourself. You were on our show before, but welcome back.
Thank you, Young. So nice to see everybody. Rebecca Winthrop. I direct the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution and have been in and out of education in the US and around the globe for the last, I'm getting older, so now 30 years. And Punya was on our steering committee, so he should definitely jump in because he had a pretty big hand along with the rest of our steering committee members for shaping this. But I will kick off with what we did and why, and then see where you want to take it. So in, let's see, September 2024, we launched the Brookings Global Task Force on AI in Education to do a pre-mortem on generative AI and students learning and development. We were not focused heavily on back office efficiency, generative AI's ability to streamline bus schedules and bell calendars, all of that. I think there's huge potential. We were really focused on young people and their experiences. And the reason we focused on young people and their experiences because we didn't want the same movie playing out with generative AI as played out has been playing out with social media, when really teachers, parents, students themselves, coaches, social workers, academics, child development specialists, all of you were not necessarily at the table and thinking about not just the design, but how it's rolled out and the use cases. So that was the idea. The idea was to do a quick snapshot, asking the question, are we headed in the right direction? As rigorously as we could, given that it was a 1 year deep dive and the technology changes rapidly. And we did three main methods, used three main methodologies to try to get this snapshot. Uh, One was literature review, just reviewing all the studies coming out fast and furious and really trying to select for ones that were rigorous because there's all sorts of things coming out. And we reviewed over 400 studies. Two, we talked to a lot of people. Again, I don't have to convince all of you, but this report speaks to many audiences, including policymakers. And I always say, look, imagine if we paid attention to the stories of parents when, the like button showed up on social media of what was happening to their kids in those early years, we would have gotten an early picture. And so that's what we did. We interviewed parents, students, educators, technologists, education leaders around the globe. And then the third thing we did was a Delphi panel, which you all know here, but in case your listeners don't, it's a great methodology of a very sort of structured set of processes and questions of experts who to help forecast. And it's particularly useful in times of uncertainty or in times of new fields. So those are the three things we did. So I don't know, Young, where you want to go or if Punya wants to weigh in.
No, I want to know, give us 3 or 4 points of your major conclusions. That's what I'm really
Okay,
interested in. Yeah.
sure. Okay, so after doing all that and lots of back and forth with our steering group members, etc., our ultimate conclusion is that currently we are headed in the wrong direction. The risks outweigh the benefits of generative AI to students' learning and development, largely because the risks seem to be of a different nature than the benefits. They seem to be undermining young people's fundamental learning abilities, such as undermining cognitive development, uh, potential to manipulate young people's emotional development with, sycophancy, undermining trust, but in the teaching and student relationships. All of those things are foundational for accessing the benefits that do exist, which are much more narrow and structured things like teachers using this tool to level reading materials to different students so they can access it, or new forms of assessment for educators to really be able to pick up where kids go wrong on the learning journey, or helping neurodivergent kids or multilingual kids really access teaching and learning content better. Those are good things, but you need trusting relationships, kids who can take feedback and interact with other people and who have developed basic thinking skills to access them. So that's the highlight.
Great. Thank you. Punya, I thought you were going to add something.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Like one is I think the idea of the pre-mortem, I think was a very insightful way of thinking about it. Because there is a lot of knowledge that we as a society or as people in the field have about how technology has played out in the past that we can use to sort of at least run sort of a simulation in our head about what this technology means. And I think one of the things, Rebecca, that came out was that kids are using it. They're using it for some for learning, but a lot for entertainment and just for other kinds of things. And we are seeing that data come out in other places as well, that they're using it for companionship and therapy and so on, right? So that's definitely happening. So the issue of whether we should incorporate it, ban it, those questions are out of the window, right? I mean, those are meaningless questions, which we spent a lot of time in the beginning worried about, worrying about things like plagiarism, worrying about things, those seem to be less consequential in some way than some of the other issues. And I think the other thing that I think the report does a really good job of, and I think Rebecca, you sort of highlighted that right off the bat, which is that there are potential benefits, right? I mean, it's very hard to pinpoint and say these benefits are happening. Um, in some cases, I know Mary had a recent blog post about what do you call it? The intelligent
Intelligent
tutoring
tutoring.
systems. Yeah,
Mhm.
and that there is some significant, and as to in the grand scheme of things, how significant that significance is we can debate. But all the potentials are far outweighed by the kinds of risks that we're talking about, right? Where the potential is about like, oh, we might save time on X, while the other end it is like cognitive development, social emotional development. I mean, we are talking at foundational sort of human characteristics versus some potential benefits. So I think that was something that I think the report makes a pretty clear point of like issues of equity, of getting dependence. I mean, I just saw this study actually day before yesterday, and it really struck a chord with me where they had children working with these sort of guardrailed AI systems, right? So these are ones which don't give you obvious answers, will not take you off the thing, and all of that stuff, right? And they were putting them to use for creative tasks. And what they found is that once they take the kids off those AI systems, actually the ones who had used the AI systems versus those who had not trusted their own creativity much less because they were falling for the surface fluency of the output of an AI and thinking, oh, I can never create something like that. And so in some ways, these tools, we talk about cognitive dependence and offloading. This is the first study that I saw which focus on something that I deeply care about, and I think all of us in this deeply
Mhm.
care about, which is creativity. And and so yeah, so anyway, I mean, so there's a whole bunch of sort of issues, and I think the big one is that the negatives are cutting at some things which are very foundational, while the potential benefits seem relatively, weak. Would be, I think, one big conclusion to take away. I think the one that I would also think a little bit about, one of the benefits that people are talking about is saving of time. The research is increasingly showing that people who are experts in the field are actually having to put in a lot more cognitive effort to quote unquote clean up the output of AI because they have the judgment to be able to do so. while novices tend to A, believe the output of AI much more and do not have the judgment to evaluate the output. So that's another sort of potential thing that we might want to talk about. But I mean, there are other things in the report we can talk about, but I think those are some of the key things that sort of stand out for me.
Yeah, Young, reminded me of three things that I want to add on the
Please
table here
do.
for your
Yeah.
discussion that we found. One he referenced, which is we found in communities where kids have access to devices and broadband, kids are accessing AI anywhere and everywhere, and the lines between entertainment, ed tech, technology just for education and technology for communication are totally blurred. It is very hard now to tell where one ends and the other begins. The, kid who's, I remember vividly in one of the focus group discussions, it crystallized for me, said, "Oh, yeah, our school banned ChatGPT. He was a high school student in the US. But, we all just use Snap AI to do our homework." And so I said, "Oh, this was a while ago." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, we go on to Snapchat and chat with our friends and do our streaks. And then we, talk to our AI friend. And uh, we might have discussions with it about whatever they're feeling, annoying parents, whatever. And then they take a picture of their math homework or their essay prompt and say, please do my homework for me. And then they can copy and paste it and, boom, boom, boom. So, so that's one. It's really, again, for kids who have access to broadband and technology, it's omnipresent. And two, of course, people have talked about this. It's not a technology that was invited into education. It's not like you had to procure, new devices or get licenses for use. Like it's a software. It just showed up whether we parents or we educators wanted it to show up or not, and without much preparation. And then the third thing is that because young people are able to access it Gen AI anywhere and everywhere. I mean, you do a Google search, it's now in Gmail. um, we saw that a lot of the problems, a lot of the risks that we mentioned, and there we highlighted the top six risks we found and the top six benefits that we found. A lot of the risks are from what the Center for Humane Technology calls wide AI use, generative AI use, which is commercial frontier model chatbots and commercial AI friends or companions that are not designed for kids, not designed for learning. And a lot of that use is not necessarily in the classroom directly, it's out and about and around in kids' lives. So that wide AI use is, I think, for all of us, the thing we should try to really mitigate. The benefits, more or less, were related to what is called narrow AI use, which is the intelligent tutoring systems, the textbook that embeds AI chatbots into its, 10th grade science lessons, and a kid reads a paragraph twice and doesn't understand and asks, can you, explain it a different way to me? Again, that is less worrisome. That's more where you see the benefits, vetted content, integrated into good pedagogy, often, though not always, teacher intermediated and used. So I wanted, those were the three things. Actually, fourth, one more thing. Punya's point about saving teacher time. I think this is a policy question, and it's very, very important for all of us to keep our eyes on it and be vigilant. So many educators told us, yes, I use this. It's saving me a ton of time and it's incredibly helpful. Like it was really one thing that was incredibly helpful is educators' efficiency. And, there's a lot of paperwork and admin and all sorts of things that educators felt they were being helped by. And then right with the second breath, they said, I hope my principal doesn't find out. In the US, I hope my school board doesn't find out. They were less worried about their principal, but their school board, because if they find out, they're going to assign me double the course load, double the students. So saving teacher time only holds as a benefit if we maintain teacher workloads the same.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's remember when we were when we were in London and Google, that was the main highlight. They said saves teachers time, but I think there's a lot of hidden uses. Teachers,
Yeah.
students actually hide their use, which can be quite dangerous actually.
Yeah.
But Chris, go ahead.
Well, Rebecca, thank you for coming and sharing the report and your insights. I want to say a little more about Rebecca than she did herself because when she was on Silver Lining for Learning last, which was over 5 years ago, it was still with Brookings, but it was in a different capacity, the Center for Universal Education, which made major contributions to ed tech across the world over the decades, a variety of contributions, a variety of ed tech, a variety of countries. And I think that kind of context is important because uh, it, in reports like this and on boards, as Punya is, it's important to have people for whom this isn't their first rodeo. This isn't their first time with a gee whiz technology that was going to solve everybody's problems and be a silver bullet. And having that historical perspective, and for that matter, having a historical perspective on AI over time, over half a century of unfulfilled promises, is really important in framing the lens. I think what I like most about the report is where you started, because as Punya said, um, too often ed tech is presented as having benefits, and then the question is to what extent has it achieved those benefits?
Hmm.
And so, in AI, as with other technologies that have come along, there are these wonderful benefits that are promised. And then where there is a debate about it, the debate tends to be, well, yes, we aren't quite there. We lied a little bit. We aren't quite there. But give us another 2 years and another $2 billion, and
Right.
we will be there. And it's quite different to say there are intrinsic risks that go outside of the benefits that um, that we could give you 10 years and $10 billion and the intrinsic risks would still be there,
Right.
even if the benefits were better fulfilled. That's a much richer conversation. And it's one that often we haven't, and I'm saying we, including myself, we haven't been smart enough to frame in ed tech. And I'm so happy to see that now it's being framed in this way, because one thing we know, especially about children, is that what happens in their context is really important for their lives. It isn't
Yeah.
just the direct interventions; it's all of the situational impacts. And you know, no one no one really has been asking what you're asking, which is it a good idea for kids to have a sidekick that's identified as smarter than they are?
Right.
And when you frame it that way, of course, the answer is no. It's not a good idea. But I'm impressed with the report, and I think the challenge is going to be that the companies will simply ignore the sort of intrinsic risks and focus on the fact that, well, when this was written, yes, it still didn't know that 2 plus 2 was 4, but within 3 months, we will have done a major new training set, and hey, then it's going to know that. So what's the issue?
Right. Well, I really appreciate that, Chris. And of course, I have learned much from you along the way in this field. So right back at you in terms of gratitude. The thing that we thought a lot about is what are we what do we know to be true that we can then assess, are we on the right track or are we not? And we really honed in on three things that we put right up top of the report saying, we collectively as an education community working with young people and knowing about child development and learning over the many years know a couple of things to be true. One, we know that young people are not little mini cognitive processing machines, that they learn in relationship and that their emotions affect their cognitions, their cognition. So, because I think that's one way that the debate gets narrowed, short-circuited, and off track. The second thing we know is that schools serve many purposes. We only have to look to COVID for people to broadly remember, oh gosh, yes, not only is there caretaking purposes, there's self-regulation, social emotional development purposes, sharing, hearing other people, there's civic purposes. It's really the only institution, certainly I speak for the United States at the moment, where young people meet people outside of their families and their direct neighbors. We're in a very polarized context. So there's civic purposes, right? There's a wide range of purposes that schools serve. It's not just a very important purpose, which is academic knowledge acquisition and skill development. Very important, but not the whole thing. And the third thing we said we know, and is our sort of pillar, is that technology is not pedagogy. Just because you introduce technology doesn't mean it's going to change teaching and learning, at all, especially if it's, we have many lessons from many past rollouts, if it's never used, or B, it might not change it for good either, right? It's not a one for one, it's not the same thing. So just saying technology is going to be great, we're going to sprinkle it around, we know that is not true. It's really how it's used and how to use wisely. So those were our three main assumptions from which we base this work.
Lydia,
So,
go ahead.
quickly,
I'm
one
sorry,
quick
Punya,
comment
go ahead.
here. No, that's okay. So yesterday I was presenting at the AACT conference, and one of the things I said, like, how many people read that manifesto that came out from all educators across the world in October of 2022, which said, truly all we need to fix all of education's problems is a chatbot. Like nobody was thinking that, right? Anybody who's done work in education, like dabbled in it even lightly, understands that the way learning happens and way education is structured and all of those things, and then this chatbot comes out and suddenly it's like, oh, this is going to be the like the savior of all education. I just find that and the rhetoric around it, like particularly, right? When you can look at Shah Khan or others, I have this whole series of Dan Meyer does this great job of taking this bunch of quotes from Bill Gates over the years, where every technology was the solution, and so I have this one slide where I replace all of the old technologies with AI. And I was like, yeah, this is what it's going to do. And I just find that the three things, Rebecca, that you said about what we know, if we don't factor those into our thinking
Mhm.
about any of these technologies, that's a problem. One. Two, there are technologies which kind of function within a classroom context, and there are other technologies which people would call like a cultural technology. So television is a cultural technology, print is a cultural technology, social media is a cultural technology. I think AI is a cultural technology, which means its impact is going to be quite much more outside of the learning environment in terms of what students or kids learn and know when they come into the classroom. And a focus just on what happens within those four walls, I think also misses the point. And I think that the report does a really good job of distinguishing. Anyway, just a quick comment. Lydia, please.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the framing of the wide use of AI and narrow use of AI. When I hear this, when I try to put these in my own words, it seems the wide use of AI is like the unguided, like unreflective use of AI. That's kind of the students or user are just basically um, getting into the default mode that how these technology were designed, which is probably designed to be for engagement. So you spend more time with these chatbot or whatever application. And on the other hand, there's a narrow use of AI. These seem to be guided, intentionally thought of, pedagogically grounded ways of using AI that are beneficial. So like my question is how can we help educator and learners to navigate this wide and narrow use of AI towards more like beneficial use of AI? Since can't put the genie back in this box. Like
Mhm.
you're absolutely right. This is an invited technology that like social media just invaded our space. And as educator, we somehow still have to guide students
Mhm.
to, towards probably this narrow use of AI. What recommendation advice do you have for
Mhm.
educators and learners and even parents?
Mhm. Such a good question, Lydia, that we spend a lot of time debating in the task force. Um, Ultimately, we came up with three big recommendations. In truth, there's 12 recommendation under three pillars. The three pillars are prosper, prepare, protect. Prosper being we in education are going to have to shift teaching and learning experiences that right away. There's a lot of urgency now to make sure that kids still have the experiences we know they need to develop cognitively, emotionally, socially. Schools are, you know, perhaps some of the best places to do this and preserve some real space for in-person exchange, embodied experiences, especially as screens and AI saturate out-of-school experiences, which is much harder for parents, busy parents to figure out and lock down. So, under the Prosper piece, we had a bunch of recommendations. Some of them were around co creation of good uses with educators, some of them were around ensuring um, there's AI council, student councils, whether that's a district or a school or whatever, however jurisdictions want to do it, where students are really engaged in thinking through this because one of the things we found, and it wasn't just our own qualitative research, we found, surveys also show this, that kids are really worried. They're worried about this technology making them dumber. The number one thing in our qualitative research kids were worried about was their cognitive decline. And, I even saw a recent survey out of the UK, which was global, of sort of young adults, kind of college, early work age. And it wasn't that AI was taking their jobs, their number one concern. It was that they were becoming dumber. So kids worry about this. I think they are thinking a lot about it, and we need to really open up that discussion with them. We had a student who was a co-author who she was a senior in high school at the time. She's now a freshman in college. And she really had great recommendations about, we can do beta testing. We can work with teachers to see your assignments. Can they be hacked? We can look at procurement agreements before schools procure. It's our data. We want to know what's happening to, our data. So those are some examples. The thing that I'm particularly interested in as we move at Brookings into sort of a phase two research agenda, I'm particularly interested in what my colleague Mary Burns coined in our report as what does AI aware pedagogy look like, AI assisted pedagogy, and AI resistant pedagogy. So AI aware, like, ooh, maybe we should not do that because we have AI, or we should do that because there is AI. AI assisted is where do you want to use AI to help? I think personally, virtual reality, even though it's super expensive, but super interactive virtual reality could be quite incredible, especially for practicing things. And then, of course, AI resistant. Where do we absolutely want to make sure, young people don't have any AI intermediate experiences? So that's the first one. The second one, prepare, is really about holistic AI literacy. Of course, AI literacy means many different things to many different people. We really indexed on the AI Lit framework, the OECD, EU, code.org collectively developed framework that has the four dimensions that include not just how to use it and understand it, but how to create and design. And I think I'm just increasingly convinced that the main thing we need is for young people to understand the online world. And it is time. It's probably time. The advocates for computer science education have been saying this for a long time. It's time that, alongside biology, where kids learn about the living world, we need to teach kids about how the online world works. And knowing that there's zeros and ones, demystifies this thing. It's not a person. It doesn't have emotions. It's not really your friend. And then the third is protect, which is all the safety um, guardrails that are needed. And I think we will see movement on that. I think this sort of social media, getting phones out of school, increasing the age of use for social media accounts has readied the public for Gen AI in terms of grassroots advocacy. And I also think education jurisdictions can do a lot with procurement criteria, especially if they band together and have sort of collective purchasing power and say, we're just not going to let anything that doesn't meet XYZ safety standards, whether it's data privacy or, horrific, you know, going off the rails around harming kids, all these terrible cases, whatever it is. We have a bunch of suggestions in the report, but lots of people are working on that.
Kurt. Thanks, Rebecca. Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. We've covered a lot of aspects of this report, and there are different stakeholders, of course, in each and everything that we do. And you've done a really good job of talking to other researchers about what your findings are, and politicians, and what the takeaways would be, and parents, and even children. But I want to talk about two different audiences. One more pragmatic. Actually, both are pragmatic when it comes down to it. I tend to ask the pragmatic questions. This week, starting tomorrow, and actually starting last week, because I was assigning this, in my R678 Emerging Learning Technologies class, a few years ago, I changed from 100-page syllabus, 115-page, to just reading special issues. And then last year, I had 2 weeks on government reports. And next week is week 7, where focus is government and nonprofit reports. I've handed out 15 reports virtually to 15 or 16 different students. 2 of them are working as pairs. This report is not in there because the syllabus has to be created all year long until you're ready to go in January. This came out in January, right?
Yeah. Last month.
And so we have another government report week in maybe week 13 or something coming up. But I try to summarize 1 or 2 reports during the physical meeting. We actually have a class that meets face-to-face and an online section. So Monday night I meet face-to-face. Tuesday night I have an online section. I have Sheila Jaganathan from Little Bang coming in on Tuesday, who was a guest in this show, just like you were previously, and Mary Burns was previously. Mary's come to my class. Sheila's been before. Chris has come before. Everyone shows up at least once. So I'm going to give myself a mission to try and summarize aspects of your report. It's 219 pages, okay? I've got till Monday.
We have, Kurt, a one. Okay, I'm going to help you out.
I see the one-pager. I see that.
We have a 1-pager, a 6-pager, and a 15-minute podcast.
Bless you.
And a 1-hour launch event with a discussion.
So thank you for doing that. So that will save me some time. Maybe I'll contact AI as well and hear what he or she has to say. But
what it
has to say
don't
about
refer to
this.
Not a person, what it has to say.
And I might throw in this if Punya has a chance to put this together, and I'll play a piece of this podcast show for my students to spur some discussion. This Monday is about discussing these reports, presenting. Each of us has to present one, lead discussion, and so forth. It's going to be fun. I'm just going to add this one too. I just want to point that out. And I'm going to do my best to come up with something that's worth, and 219 pages. I'm going to try and do what I can. Yeah, I'm going to use the little pieces. So thank you for that. But going back to the other audience, the students that are in this class. It's an educational technology class, and some students are coming from special ed and other fields, CNI and language ed. They might be interested about because many of our doctoral students, and they might end up in a position in a nonprofit
Yeah.
organization or a government agency, or even in a corporate setting doing technical reports and being a research arm, because next week's guest is actually in a corporate setting as a research director and so forth. You never know. So, can you tell us a little bit about the background of this?
Mm,
How many people are involved? How long does it
yeah.
take to
How do you
do
pull
a
it off?
report? How do you pull it off? Does
Yeah.
the funding ebb and flow?
Yeah.
Is it soft money, or are people who are doing this hired for the long term, or is it
Right.
some of both?
Yeah.
Give people because they're reading tons of reports this week. They're very similar to this from the Pew Foundation,
Yeah.
from many from
Lots,
UNESCO.
lots. There's a
The
lot.
U.S. Department of Ed, when we did have one, their last year's Ed Tech plan. So they're probably going to wonder, well, who's behind all this? And you're just the right person that can give us some flavor of what those people are like and what
Yes.
their careers are like.
Yes. Well, let me, if you take a clip, let me talk to your students who might want to know, how do you pull this off? And if I were doing this job, what would it be like for me? So the first answer is it depends a bit on the institution in terms of how these reports are financed. So that's number one. I will just talk to you about Brookings. It will be a very different decision tree for a World Bank report, for example, that has a corpus of funding, and then their managers decide their priorities, and then they go off and do it. So Brookings is a nonprofit. We are a .edu. We are a think tank, which means we have scholars, but for us at Brookings, we are rewarded in our annual reviews for impact. And impact in the Brookings world is not submissions and acceptances in peer-reviewed journal articles. We do that, but we do it after we put things out in the public domain. So we always try to put stuff out in the public domain, not behind paywalls as much as possible, and try to get our research into the hands of the stakeholders who we think need to hear it to make decisions. And there's really three big things, and this is not just my education center, this is all of Brookings, that Brookings scholars are trying to do. We are trying to shape agendas, and this is when we assess, oh my gosh, no one is talking about this issue, but it's a really big burning issue, and it's going to really impact, in our case, it would impact children and learning and their well-being, and we need to get it on the agenda. We need to get people focused on it and talking about it. And the methods we use for that is slightly different. Or, which is the case here, is it about debate shaping? Everybody's talking about this topic. Everyone's talking about this topic, but they're kind of either confused and mixed up, or it's hard to see a path forward, which is what I would argue where we were at, or everyone's sort of going in the wrong direction because they're missing an entire body of evidence that would really reshape their thinking and come to different conclusions. So that's the second one. Or is it number three? Is it sort of policy advising or designing, policy designing, which is it's on the agenda. You know, people are sort of, the debate is heading in the right direction. People just don't know what to do. It's sort of like, well, okay, I get it. Okay, that's a problem. All right, I get what am I supposed to do about it? And that's a much more tactical sort of, A, B, C, D, do this, this is how, this is with whom type of research and impact. And, often the people who read the 200-page report, Kurt, you, but maybe not your students, uh, are not the policymakers, but their staff do, or what people read is the 6-pager and the 1-pager in the podcast, and they give it credence because they know that Brookings is completely independent, that isn't influenced by any funding or any special interests, and they know there's a 200-page report sitting behind the executive summary. Most people read the executive summary to great, you know, morale drop of all the scholars who know their stuff isn't read. But you have to do the 200-pager to get to the 6-pager. So that's sort of how Brookings works. And we are really ultimately a nonprofit. My center, it feels like running a nonprofit that is sort of independent research based in a big Brookings platform because we raise all our own funding. And so it is all soft money. And so the size and impact you're going to have is going to be commensurate on the team you can hire and the resources you have to do the project. So in this case, we had 4 people working on it. Hard sprint for a year, and I was one of them. And I have many responsibilities, so I was not full time. So maybe that's 3.5-ish. Um, yeah, and then the process was incredibly important because it wasn't just the 4 of us alone in a room for a year. We had an incredible task force that had a steering group of amazing people. They were all education experts. We didn't have any private sector members of the steering group because we wanted to center it in children well-being and education expertise. But we had a whole series of working groups and practitioner collaboratives that did have technologists and all sorts of different people who had things to say, who were part of the task force process. And that is a lot to manage and coordinate, but it makes the work much richer
Yeah.
for doing
And
it.
then the focus groups and all the people you
Well,
consulted
and then
with,
there's the direct research.
hundreds of people there. It's impressive. I saw the list of people that were on that review, Barbara Tracy and others that, we're all familiar with. So yeah, it's pretty impressive what you're in. You said it was just 4 or 6 of you in terms of in charge of this?
No, it was 3.5.
3.5 people.
For a year, 18 months, 18 months, because we designed the research methodology, we sent out the invites, we gathered everybody. That was, and then it was like a year research sprint, and then it's fact check, review, revise, editorial, and publish.
So,
I'm
so
just gonna ask
Rebecca,
this little question here, very small question. Is there someone you're meeting a deadline with on doing this, or it's just carefree? Whenever we get it done, we get it done.
Well, the money runs out.
Okay.
So there is a Venn diagram. There's sort of what I would want to do in the world, or what my colleagues, because, we're a collection of scholars who work on different topics, want to do in the world, and then what we can get funding for.
Hmm.
And we might want to do a 3-year something something, but get a 1.5 year, in which case we'll do it in 1.5 years. In this case, we got 2 years of funding, which was great because then I could hire the team, and then you get, you do a little, at least several months of startup, and then, scope the project, get the project running, and then you do wrap up and start dissemination.
So people are just
Rebecca,
hired from project to
really
project. Yeah.
flies. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Kurt, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead,
No,
Young.
I was
Jump in.
so I'm really curious. Okay, I want to know 2 things,
Okay.
not in the report. Okay, but through your 2 years of experience, one is, are there any insights that never made into it, even of a small minority? Like a small people, some
Mm,
we say something that's interesting.
mm,
Another thing has broader is really relying on, since like Chris said, you have so much experience, you've been in so many different places, talked to so many people, your personal insights really of the future. Because now everybody's worried. If you're giving birth to a child in 2026, OMG, right? Think about it, 20 years later, what can we do?
mm,
Would education be the same? Would their jobs be the same? Of course not, right? I mean, so I would like to see your insights. But first, what did not make into the report?
mm.
Might be interesting.
There was a lot that didn't make it in, but with Mary and all our research team, we spent so much time trying to figure out where there was a growing consensus. I'm like, was there something really significant? Well, I had there was a lot, but it was lots of little things that didn't sort of rise to the top and fit into our big 6. Some of the things. were kind of my half-baked ideas that, my co-authors rightly were like, no, not ready for prime time, Rebecca. Leave it, leave it. Because one of them was around, well, it was really back to Lydia, your question. There seemed to be an interest or a sort of emerging sort of rule of thumb that practitioners were making. I would say maybe less classroom teachers, but more sort of NGO leaders, school level leaders, tech folks in the ecosystem, where they said, we feel that the highest risk area is this untested direct relationship between generative AI and young people, students themselves. That seems really high risk because if it's gonna go wrong, there's like a lot bad that can go wrong, and we don't quite. It's new, but it seems less of a high risk with adults and particularly with educators. So, I kept trying to think about like, do we have, and I still think it would be helpful, like a rule of thumb we could make of like, what makes something high risk? What makes something low risk? That was not fully baked, so we didn't include it. So that's one thing. I would be curious if all of you have ideas on that. And what was your second question, Young? Question, Young, I
I
forgot.
was really thinking about your personal insight
Oh, yeah.
about the future, not the report, but the
Yeah.
report is part of it. I mean, what would we do if I mean I can't have a child now, but if, imagine you had a child today. What are you thinking the education
Yeah.
would be like?
Yeah. So I'm a little bit of two minds on this one. I think overall I was much more optimistic about the benefits and potential of Gen AI if we could find a way, the narrow use cases. Let's really find a way to harness this at the beginning of the research process, and now I'm really quite worried. Again, because the risks are just so fundamental, and also I live in the United States, so I also have kids in the US, and in the US, guardrails seems to be a question. If I lived in Europe and there was the AI Act and there was a lot, there's prohibitions on, a whole bunch of things, social scoring, use in education and young people, I might be a little more optimistic because there seemed to be societal appetite and guardrails in place. So that's generally, I think, my personal takeaway. Um, I and then I'm of a two minds. Are we going to see completely different education if I had a kid today and they were in high school in 15, 12 years, well, yeah, 12 years from now? Um, Maybe, but maybe I think the worst case scenario would be we just keep doing high school, schooling, traditional schooling models as we are, and kind of pretend this technology doesn't exist or layer a transformative technology over traditional approaches. And it's just kind of the worst of both worlds. And we sort of slowly hollow out young people's engagement motivation, which is not high anyways, and their cognitive and emotional and social development. Um, Ideally, in an optimistic, sunny way, and this is what I focus on in terms of where I would like to do sort of phase two research myself personally, is how can we lean in on that prosper pillar? Like, what could we do that uses this moment as a true transformative energy catalyst? And, we do a lot more perhaps community workplace learning experiences, especially as kids get older, that there's many models out there and, seems like a very appropriate way to move into the future. I do think we need to make sure schools, we commit to kids to have a schooling experiences that, as my colleague John Villan and I talk about, are as human as possible. Uh, that doesn't mean no technology, no, exposure in very strategic, narrow ways that can be helpful, but we don't want to move to a world where every kid is just sitting in front of a screen with a AI
This
tutor.
is what worries me most is the denial of actual uses by both teachers and the students. And you were
This trust piece.
yeah, I don't. Did you mention Jean-Claude?
Do I know Jean-Claude?
No, no. Did you I heard you mention that name, but anyway, maybe it's not. So
Oh, I mentioned John Vallant, but
oh, okay.
are you talking about Jean-Claude from Digital Promise?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They were, yeah, they were part of the steering group. Yeah.
Yeah, because we took a digital promise group of the smart cities from all over the world to Shanghai. And
Oh, he
then we
told me
had a
about that visit, by the
yeah,
way.
that was in November. So I was there, they were exposed Shanghai. Then we had a reflection recently, 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe last week, with them. What worries me is schools really do not know what to do. I mean, if you think about it, so they may have a policy that's ban it,
Yeah.
and but as you said, it's actually like I think you mentioned, it just happens. You don't need anything; it just happens to people. And I was talking to a group of schools in New York. They had a similar kind of react. They don't know what to do. So like people are actually using it, but there's no guidance. This might fall into the trap of social media. Might be the same thing, right? Because social media, in essence, we did not teach people. We just let it happen. So this could happen. So I was just wondering, but we use in the last few minutes your really thoughts about that. I'm talking
Yeah.
about your thoughts, not the
Yeah.
report's thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. The report because had
They're
Punya
very
on it.
they're very merged at the moment, having co-authored the report. But um, maybe I'll talk about where I'm interested, the next sort of 2.0 research agenda that I want to do personally. I want to do is really around this idea. And if you guys have any suggestions and thoughts, please email me, including your listeners. What makes a learner in an age of generative AI? Because we don't know, because the field of child development hasn't had this technology. We don't really know, as far as I can tell, what young people have to do for themselves and what it's okay if Gen AI does for them. And where is that balance? I mean, I'd be super curious from all of you. Do you think we have an answer to that question? I don't, we interviewed a ton of neuroscientists and child development specialists, and people have gut ideas, but I think that's an important question for us to answer as a field.
So
Anyone wants? Yeah, go
I
ahead, Chris.
can I can try to answer some of that. I mean, I think that if we go from learning to working and we say what with adults
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace is the right way for them to develop themselves so that they're good partners for Gen
Mm-hmm.
AI. There's a framework called intelligence augmentation that was actually developed by a philosopher before the advent of Gen AI about AI writ large
Mm-hmm.
that I referenced in a lot of my talks and writings that says AI is good at doing reckoning, human beings are good at doing everything else, which is applied wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And the big moral is that we shouldn't be teaching so much reckoning anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be focusing much more on applied wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the high stakes tests are 100% reckoning.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we judge our education systems by how well kids do on high stakes tests, we're teaching them to lose to Gen AI. So that's not a neuroscience answer. It's kind of a pragmatic answer
Right.
that says the special things that human beings can do turn out to be pretty broad, and the special things that AI can do turn out to be pretty narrow. Yeah. And
The
yet
problem,
the overlap between what we're teaching in education and
yeah,
what the narrow things are that AI
yeah.
can do is horrendously large.
The problem, Chris, this is just maybe a final question to leave to you for a future episode that I will happily listen to, is in order to do applied wisdom, from my reading, you need some domain expertise. You need something to apply. And pragmatically, in a Gen AI world, how are kids going to develop the domain expertise if not at the moment going back to blue book exams without screen. I mean, honestly, like how do you make sure the knowledge gets into kids at the moment? I think that is a big struggle, and it's points to sort of old school pedagogies.
I
You
think
know,
I think there are good answers to that question, but none of them can fit into even an hour. So
Okay.
we
All right.
will
To be
have to
continued.
come up with some of that. I mean, I think maybe not for kids, but for adults, the answer is the classic liberal arts education, which turns out to have a
Right.
very high map onto 21st century
Right.
skills and onto
Right.
things like applied wisdom.
Yeah.
But my musing toward the end is that um, medicine and public health have done a pretty good job of educating adults about what's dangerous for kids.
Hmm.
So I know around the holidays that I always see a news story from this group that decides which toys are physically dangerous. And they highlight those toys and
Hmm.
say, don't buy these, don't use these, here's why. Similarly, until recently, there were diseases for kids that were identified as pretty dangerous. And adults were told, please vaccinate your kids against this stuff because it's going to cause a lot of needless pain. We've never had something like that in education, in
Mm.
part because there's no group that that is universally accepted as having stature in
Mm.
education, and in
Mm.
part because we've not been willing to make the enemies that always happen when you give references like that. But when I think about if I were, somehow king and I could set up that list, certainly never use character AI, right, would be on
Mm.
that list. Certainly, if you lock a child into a room and have a chatbot tutor them on high stakes tests for 12 years, they'll pass the Gaokao, but then they'll be in trouble and miserable for the rest of their life. That's another,
And probably in trouble, miserable for the for those
for the
years
first part
too.
of their life too. So it wouldn't be that hard to come up with some things that
That's a really good idea.
are so bad that we can just say, don't do this. And
I love that
maybe
idea,
we're at a
Chris.
point
Let's
where we
work on
have to
that.
do
We could do
that.
A Brookings sort of basic
Yeah,
do's and don'ts, or at least
I'm in
don'ts.
for that. I'm in
well,
for
the
that.
the
Well,
problem is this: if Chris created one, there will be another person who just come immediately to say, "Well, that's completely wrong." You were mentioning about Gaokao. In China, well, Lydia will know this. A lot of people endorse that. Said Gaokao is the only objective way to select people, and which I completely disagree. That's why I came to this country. But this country is actually driving me to other places. Well, for other reasons. So Rebecca, if you want to create, you should create two lists. What we
yeah,
suggest to ban, another said why we shouldn't ban it, and that would be a much better
true.
Oh,
way.
To
that's
cover
good.
both sides. Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
you
part
cover
of the
both
challenge,
sides.
yeah,
Go
no,
ahead,
I think
Pune.
part of the, no, this part of the challenge here is like, I was just reading recently. So Australia just had this under 16 ban for social media, right? So you can't
France
use
is going to
Snapchat.
do
Well,
the
guess
same,
what?
I think.
No, but guess what's happening? Kids are moving to WhatsApp and they have continuing the Snapchat streaks on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to grasp, that we now have Grok, a chatbot, which would allow you to create nudes of your
Yeah.
friends. I mean, there is a bigger social responsibility issue that these companies have to face up to, who are working in a completely unregulated way under the guise of competitiveness or whatever the rationale may be given. And those forces are like they can just introduce this thing and throw it out into the world.
Yeah.
I always say that like if I have to interview even one of you to write a journal article, I have to go and get IRB permission to do it. And we are in the middle of a global sort of social experiment that's going on. We saw that happen with social media. And we seem to have learned nothing from it. And so I think the challenge is more foundational than that. So, Chris, I love the idea that you can make these recommendations, but the lines are so blurry. So character AI, sure, don't, or don't do it with replica or whatever. But it doesn't take a lot to get your free chatbot to do a lot of
Yeah.
those things because we
True.
have no guardrails. I mean, it's just I just feel that the situation is
I do think
so much more complicated.
though Punya, I I do see glimmers of hope again under the protect pillar that like you're talking about. it's the only bipartisan issue that I can spot in the United States is basically child safety and regulating AI companions for kids' safety. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who are brainstorming. We have a visiting scholar with us at the moment, Gaia Bernstein, who's a legal scholar, and she's really looking at a legal strategy of regulating and putting safeguards in place with AI through public health product safety laws. You don't even need new laws. If it's having an impact on kids' safety, well-being, which like suicide, self-harm, loneliness, it all does. That's one way. And, the other piece is folks at MIT or is it Harvard, I'm forgetting, are looking at the same sort of approach, but through like a pharma approach of testing medicines, which frankly, big companies don't want to be undercut by unethical companies. They want those sort of, you have to not just do test your medical interventions to see if it doesn't kill anybody, but the threshold is actually, is it going to help anybody? It's so, that could be
Right.
another avenue. I got
All
really
right.
pissed.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Rebecca.
Young, I
Looks
know
like
you have
if
to
we
close.
can go on, we should run this like a
Okay,
10-hour, series. That this is there. This conversation does not, Irene, can never stop. We'll definitely get you back some other time to talk
there we
about
go.
other things. I think this is a very, very interesting topic, and thank you so much. And Kurt is going to introduce our next episode.
Thank you, Young. Thank you, Rebecca.
My
My
pleasure.
students are going to
Fun.
learn a lot from you and with your report. So thank you very much on that. Next week, the title is Partners in a Sandbox, Interdisciplinary Teams Addressing Educational Challenges and Possibilities. That's a tentative title, and we're at 1 p.m. Eastern Time next week. And the second guest I'll mention first, Isaac Kwakwe, is the Deputy Executive Director at the Washington Student Achievement Council in Emporia, Washington. He has extensive experience in research policy analysis. I mentioned him first since it extends this week's conversation. The other guest is from Sandbox in Toronto, where Lydia's housed. Maybe she can go take a visit during the week and get more info. Patricia Magual is the Director of Research and Digital Learning Initiatives at Sandbox. Sandbox began with a passion for telling important stories through film, putting its creativity at the service of mission-oriented organizations in the public and nonprofit sectors. I could go on, but take a look at what they're all up to there. It'll be an interesting conversation, and we'll see you next time.